It is not uncommon that probably most of us here are familiar with the movie Forrest Gump. One of my favorite lines, and if I asked you your favorite line from Forrest Gump, you might be able to rattle off a Mama Always Says, or a shrimp gumbo, shrimp creole, shrimp this, shrimp that, right? My favorite line is something a little bit different. There is a scene in Forrest Gump where Forrest is sitting with Lieutenant Dan. And it's after Lieutenant Dan's accident when he's lost his legs. And they're sitting there and Lieutenant Dan is at his darkest hour of his life. And they're watching TV. And Lieutenant Dan looks at Forrest and he says, "Have you found Jesus yet, Gump?" And Forrest says, "Well, nobody told me I was supposed to look for him, sir." In that innocent, naive Forrest Gump way, no one told him it was his job to look for him. Have you found Jesus? What a dumb question. When people ask me that question, I always want to say, you mean the Lord of all creation got himself lost again? Dang. Get the man a GPS. Are you kidding me? He created the place. He's getting lost all the time. The reality is, that's a really odd theology. Jesus doesn't get lost. God doesn't get lost. We do. We're the ones who wander. Every time in my life I found myself away from God, it wasn't usually God who moved, it was me. It was me who went another way. It wasn't the Lord of all creation who somehow missed the right turn. That's a crazy theology. Today's scripture talks about the reality of that lost and found mentality, and I want to examine that with us just a bit. You see, in the gospel lesson today, we see the story of Jesus eating with the wrong sorts of people. Sinners and tax collectors. Now, sinners is obvious, right? Jesus should avoid sinners because they sin. Obvious. Tax collectors aren't quite as obvious to us unless we understand the culture of the day. Now, not that any of us, unless we work for the IRS, think tax collectors are the best people in the whole world. I'm sure all of us here cannot wait until April 15th when we are honored to do our part to support our government. Okay? It's an honor and privilege to pay our taxes, right? Right. Everyone jump up in agreement now. Tax collectors in Jesus' day were a little bit different. They didn't collect tax for their government, they collected tax for the Roman government, for the emperor, and that meant the oppressor, the enemy. Okay? And tax collectors weren't Romans. They were Jews who were subscribed by the Roman government to betray their own people and collect taxes for the Romans on behalf of their fellow townfolk. So, now there's somebody like you and me who's now turncoating and working for the enemy to fill the coffers of the enemy and the oppressor on our behalf. And how did tax collectors get paid? They didn't. They got paid by skimming off the top. So if I'm a tax collector and you owe $75 in taxes, I might tell you it's 82. And 7 are for me. That was my pay. I, as a tax collector, make my living at the expense of my family, my friends, my community. It's a pretty sleazy way to live, and tax collectors historically have not been the most loved people, and that's another reason why. Jesus is seen by the Pharisees eating with the wrong people. What would people think? What would God think? And again, you have to remember the Pharisees' attitudes. They're not bad people. They're people who understand in their mind that every time someone offends God, they end up back in oppression. They're not terrible people. They just know that every time God gets ticked, we all pay. So you gotta toe the line. You can't eat with the wrong people because we don't want to go back to Assyria, Babylon, or Egypt. You gotta figure this out, Jesus. We're not all paying because of you. Stop it now. And Jesus tells them a story. He tells a story about lost and found. He tells a story of which one of you, if you had sheep and lost one, 99 sheep, and you lost 100 sheep and you lost one, which one of you wouldn't go and search for it? When you found the lost one, celebrate that it came home. Really? Really, that's also an odd story, because if I had 99 sheep, I'm not going to leave them without a shepherd and go find the one. I would sacrifice the one to protect the 99 because the 99 could get eaten while I'm looking for the one. That's a stupid way to invest my time. Let's just be honest. That's a really dumb way to invest my time. How many of you are going to spend $3.50 to replace a turn signal on a car that's got a bad engine? Takers? It's a stupid investment, isn't it? How many of you are going to leave 99 sheep to get themselves caught in the thickets, to run off a cliff? Sheep are dumb animals, by the way. There's a reason we're called sheep. Just saying. The Bible knows exactly what it's doing. There's a reason why we're called sheep, because sheep are dumb. Leaving 99 sheep to go search for one meant you jeopardized all of them. But yet there was something about that one that was so important that it meant that much to you. That sheep was worth everything you had. That sheep was worth the search and the find. That sheep was worth the welcome and the celebration. Then there's a woman who has 10 coins and she's lost one, and she sweeps and lights lamps and diligently looks until she finds it. She calls all her friends and says, "Celebrate with me because I had $10 and I lost one and now I found the other one." Okay, party it is. But again, there's something about the joy over something that others might simply have walked away from. Nobody else might have noticed. Nobody else might have had the eyes and the heart to notice what was least, what was lost, and what was last. We switch to the first reading today from Timothy, and we see Paul telling the young pastor Timothy about his own experience and saying, "I'm the least of the people who should be serving the Lord. And because of what I've done, I don't deserve to be here, but because of how I've lived, because of who I've been, God has chosen me to change the world, to make evident God's mercy and grace, because quite frankly, if God can use me, God can use y'all." Have you ever had that experience? Back in previous years, when I first went into ministry, I remember people learning it and going, "You? Huh?" I remember being in high school and taking that I'm old enough that our very first computer was in the guidance office. It was a career test. It came out with it narrowed me down to 2 careers. One was education and one was clergy. I do both. All my friends laughed at me and said, "Oh, you'd make a good pastor." Shut up. Here I am, all these years later. Sometimes God uses us in spite of ourselves as a way of demonstrating what grace and mercy and wholeness look like to a world so desperately in need of what it means to be found. I learned a couple things today from this lesson I want to share with you, and maybe you can glean something from my own journey. The first thing I learned is that it's really easy for me to put myself in the place of the people who've been found. I like to think about how God's worked in my life and how God has brought me where God has brought me. I like to think about how God has done wonderful things in my life, even though maybe I didn't deserve it. But there are times that maybe I'm the Pharisee and not the one who got lost. What the scriptures teach me today is that sometimes we're the Pharisee in the story. And it's so easy for us to look down our nose at those who aren't quite as perfect as we are, who don't have the package quite together the way we want them to. Or might, not have everything in their life in order, and yet they have the nerve to show up to church. Can you believe what she wore today? Do you know where I saw her last night? Do you know what he used to do when we were in college? We need to talk. Sometimes we end up being the Pharisee. Yesterday we had the In the Streets festival downtown, and we had a church table. It was a wonderful experience for most of the day, but you know what I've discovered? When you're the only openly gay out pastor in Frederick County, at one of the only open and affirming churches in Frederick County, it's not a party until a fundamentalist tells you you're going to hell. It just ain't a party until somebody tells me I don't know Jesus and I need to get saved. Yesterday it happened again. My day is complete. I have just decided that my spiritual gift is pissing off fundamentalists. That is my spiritual gift. Everyone has one. But I've also decided if those are the people that are getting mad, I'm doing God's work. Sorry. You see, sometimes we're the Pharisees. Sometimes we're the ones who think that in our own self-righteousness, we get to judge who should or should not be celebrated. The reality is, God doesn't celebrate the righteous ones. We don't need celebration. You're just doing what's expected of you. God celebrates the ones who've been lost because they need to have been found. And that's an amazing, amazing thing. The second thing I learned is I need to look at my notes. The second thing I learned is that God seeks the least, the last, and the lost. God doesn't seek those who are holy and righteous because they're already there. If God seeks the least, the last, and the lost, then maybe we should too. If God seeks the least, the last, and the lost, and Jesus cared for them, then maybe we should too. As one of the great liberation theologians, Gustavo Gutierrez, said, if you aren't willing to be on the outside looking in with those people who don't have a place at the table, if you're not willing to spend your time on the outside with those who aren't welcome on the inside, you just missed Jesus Christ, because that's where he is. Over and over and over again. I saw a Facebook meme this morning that someone tagged me in. I was honored. It was sarcastic. One of my other spiritual gifts, may I share. I wish I could remember the whole thing. It said, be Christ-like. Be Christ-like. Gather crowds. Start an uprising. Whip the politicians. Drink all the wine. Care for the sex workers. And don't forget to preach love for everyone. I was honored that I got tagged in that. Because frankly, that's what it means to follow Jesus. To remind ourselves that if Jesus cared for those on the outside looking in, how could we do anything less? It is our job. You can stand there all day long at a table in Frederick, Maryland and tell me I'm going to hell. But as long as the church sign that I'm parading with says that all are welcomed and loved, I'll be okay. The third thing I learned today is that maybe if they were important enough for him to love, maybe they're important enough for me to love too. So it's not about being celebrated. It's not about being the Pharisee. It's not about finding poor lost Jesus. It's about going out to those who are lost and welcoming them home.